Is it just me, or does it seem like Jesus Christ is on his way? Is it just me, or could it be that it could happen any day?
Ruth chapter 4. Tonight we're going to finish up the book of Ruth. And of course we had the concert this morning, and the folks don't like to be on social media, so I'm videoing this. So we've got a video this week, something to put out. And this is probably the best part of Ruth when we get to the end of it. We have, in the story of Ruth, we have Naomi's husband and her two sons leave Israel to go to Moab because there's a famine in Israel, and thinking they can make a better life for themselves in Moab, the two sons marry two women from Moab, which was prohibited, but this is the time of the judges when everybody did that which was right in their own eyes. And so they married two Moabite women, and then the father and the two sons died. And they lived there about 10 years, and Naomi decided she would return, and her daughter-in-law, Orpah, and you folks probably know it, but Oprah Winfrey was named after Orpah, but her mother misspelled the name on the birth certificate. She was supposed to be Orpah Winfrey. That was supposed to be her name. But Orpah stayed in Moab, but Ruth said she wouldn't be separated from Naomi. She would stay with her and take care of her. And so they moved back to Bethlehem. And Naomi's old friends, haven't seen her in 10 years. There's no television, or telephone, there's no FaceTime, there's no emails or internet. And they haven't seen her for 10 years. And they said, wow, is that really you? And she said, oh, call me bitter. Naomi means pleasantness, but call me bitter. God has forsaken me. My husband's dead, my sons are dead, and God hates me. And that's chapter 1. Chapter 2, Naomi decides, Ruth decides, I'm going to go out in the fields and glean, as was allowed under Jewish law. It says, don't harvest your field all the way out to the corners, leave some for the poor. If you drop anything, leave it for the poor so they can pick it up. And so she goes out and she ends up in Boaz's field. She doesn't know who Boaz is. Boaz is a close relative of Naomi and Naomi's husband. And so she goes out there, and Boaz hears a good report on her, that she works hard, that he knows that she's taking care of Naomi and taking good care of her. And so Boaz instructs the workmen to make sure they leave extra for her, that she gets a bunch to take home. And I've taught this to the kids the past couple weeks, and what she ended up bringing home from the barley harvest was about a 5-gallon pailful, about 5.5 gallons when you figure the measure. And I asked the kids, could you eat 5.5 gallons of cereal at one sitting? And most of the kids said no. Isaiah said he could, but most of the kids said, no, I couldn't eat that much cereal. So she brought home a lot of food. And when Naomi asked her, whose field was it you were in? She said it was Boaz. Boaz is a near relative. And Naomi, who'd wanted to be called bitter, starts to think, now hang on, Ruth's been very good to me, and Boaz is a close relative, that he should exercise the role of kinsman redeemer, as outlined, I think it's in the book of Deuteronomy. That if someone is married and the husband dies before they have children, that the close relative would marry that woman and raise kids in the name of the one who passed away, because the year of Jubilee, everything resets, the plan all goes back to where it was. And if someone is dead and there's no inheritance, they got to figure out what to do with the land. That doesn't happen very often. Kinsman redeemer is an important part. And I mentioned that the kinsman redeemer it's his responsibility to redeem the land that has been lost because of bankruptcy or something like that. It's their responsibility if someone is killed to make sure the murderer comes to justice. And it's the responsibility to marry and bring children up in the name of the brother that has passed away. And so Naomi says, okay, Boaz is going to be celebrating. It's the end of the harvest. And take a shower and put on perfume and wear nice clothing and go, but don't let him know who you are. And that night when he goes to sleep, because he's going to sleep with the grain, lest someone come and steal it from him, she lays down at his feet. She uncovers his feet and lays down at his feet. And he wakes up in the night. He's startled. There's someone there. And who is that? It's me, Ruth. And she said, cover me with your foot covering. And what she was signifying is that they are close relatives, and she wanted him to do the part of a kinsman redeemer and marry her. Boaz was very surprised by that because Boaz is older. I don't know if Boaz was a widower. I don't know if he never married, but he was much older than she was. And he didn't think he had a chance at Ruth. He liked her. We know that because she was a hard worker. Must have been a pretty woman. And so he says, I would be happy to do that, but there is a kinsman that's closer than I am, and it's his responsibility first. If he will do that, then he needs to, but don't worry, I will take care of this today. And that brings us to chapter 4, the last chapter in the book of Ruth. And Ruth chapter 4, verse 1 says, Then went Boaz up from the gate and sat him down there, and behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, Ho, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, Sit you down here, and they sat down. Now, the meeting at the gate, the city gate, is where the esteemed and honorable men met to act as a city council and also to act as a courtroom. And so Boaz goes to the city gate to wait for the nearer kinsman. Now, he calls him, and it's kind of odd in the Bible. It says, Ho, such a one. Hey, such a one. Do you know why he didn't put the name of the man down? Because the man didn't uphold his responsibility. He dishonored the kinsman redeemer responsibility he was supposed to take, and so he's not named. We don't know who he is. But that was his responsibility. But rather than put that man's name down to humiliate him for the rest of eternity, the rest of time here on earth, he just said that there was, hey, you. That wasn't his name. But that's why we don't have his name. Poole said, Doubtless Boaz both knew his name and called him by it, but it's omitted by the holy writer, partly because it was unnecessary to know it, and principally in a way of contempt, as is usual, and a just punishment upon him, that he who would not preserve his brother's name might lose his own, and lie buried in the grave of perpetual oblivion. He was supposed to carry on his brother's name. He wouldn't do it, so his name isn't given to us. Boaz catches him completely by surprise. He, in fact, may have intended for it to look like a coincidence that they met there at that time. Remember, he tells Ruth in the morning, get up before people can tell who's moving around and leave. And he tells the other servants that are there with him, don't tell anyone. Not because they did anything wrong, not out of shame, but because he wanted to have an opportunity to kind of surprise the nearer kinsman. He had a plan in his mind already. He also calls 10 witnesses, the 10 men of the elders of the city, to officially record a public transaction. Verse 3, And he said unto the kinsman, Naomi, that is come again out of the country of Moab, selleth a parcel of land which was our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advertise thee, saying, Buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know. For there is none to redeem it beside thee, and I am after thee. And he said, I will redeem it. So he starts out by saying, now Naomi has to sell the land. She can't afford to keep it. She needs the money. And so it's sort of a bankruptcy proceeding. She's going to sell the land. And here's an opportunity for you to buy the land at a discount and get a good value on it and keep it within the family name, and that other kinsman could have kept it for himself within the family name. That was what he was thinking. Oh, great, yeah, cheap land. Great, I'll do that. And so Boaz proposes the lands transaction. It's in keeping with the Goel, that is the kinsman redeemer, that he should buy the land that Naomi is selling to keep it in the family. So he is both doing something that is right and honorable, and he's doing something that is fiscally attractive. The land could only be sold for a maximum of 50 years. We don't know how far away the Jubilee year was when the land would come back to Naomi if she were still alive, but Naomi had no choice but to sell it as she needed the money. So yeah, I'll buy it, certainly. If thou wilt redeem it. Boaz first presented this as simply a land transaction, and the nearer relative was all for it. Yeah, oh yeah, I'll buy the land. Verse 5. Then said Boaz, What day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth the Moabitess. Because remember, her husband would have been the inheritor of the land, and so it was partially hers because her husband had died. And he says, You must buy it also of Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. He says, well, there is a catch. A good piece of land, good price, but there is a catch. When the kinsman thought it was only between he and Naomi, he was all in. Naomi was past the age where he would be expected to marry her and raise up a son in her husband's name. But Ruth also had claim to the land through her dead husband, and marrying her would be part of the deal per the law. The deal involved both property and posterity. The property, the piece of land, and posterity, the brother, however they were related. And so verse 5 says, the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. So he declines his duty. It is possible that the man already had a wife and children. As I was teaching the kids this the other day, I had Isaiah and Lavelle, and I had Lucas. Lucas is he's just something else. He's kind of neat, and I was talking. And Kevin was in there with us. And I said, now it would be like, so Kevin has brothers, right? And so if something happened and, Jake passed away and brothers passed away and Kevin was the only one left, then Kevin would be obligated to marry this other woman. I said, but how do you think Tammy would feel if Kevin brought home a new wife that was younger? Do you think she'd be all in on for that deal? Kevin said, no. And the kids all said, Mom wouldn't go for that, And so that's possible. It's possible he already had his own kid, or kids, because he was worried about if I have this land in my family and I marry Ruth and now any kids we have to give not just that land, but we have to split up the inheritance again. That could be complicated. Possibly, by the way he sprang the information on the nearest kinsman, Boaz was able to have some confidence that his plan might just work. Now, we don't know if Naomi and Ruth were anywhere nearby to hear the goings-on. We don't know that. If they were, could you imagine when Boaz says, the land, oh yeah, I'll buy the land, could you imagine how Ruth and Naomi might have felt? We don't know this guy. We know Boaz. Boaz is a nice guy. We don't know this guy. We don't know that or not, but we do know, verse 7, now this was the manner in former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing, for to confirm all things. A man plucked off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor, and this was a testimony in Israel. Therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. Now, again, this is in the time of the Judges. We're quite a ways away from Deuteronomy. Because Deuteronomy, listen to this, Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 5, it says, if brethren dwell together, and one of them die, and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her, and take her to him to wife. So that's just what we're talking about, the kinsman redeemer. And perform the duty of a husband's brother unto her, that is, raising children. Verse 6 of Deuteronomy 25 says, and it shall be that the firstborn which she beareth shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel. Now, any other kids they have together are their kids. But the first son is to bring up the name of the brother that passed away. Verse 7 says, if the man like not to take him his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate unto the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to raise up unto his brother a name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of this city shall call him and speak unto him. Why aren't you marrying this woman? It's your obligation and duty. She's come and said you will not keep your obligation. And if he stand to it and say, I like not to take her, then shall his brother's wife come unto him in the presence of the elders, and loose his shoe from off his foot, and spit in his face, and shall answer and say, so shall it be done unto that man that will not build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel the house of him that has his shoe loosed. And so the taking off of the shoe, originally in Deuteronomy, back at the beginning of Israel, back when they went into the land, if you wouldn't do it, the woman had a right to spit in your face and take your shoe off. And it was known. It was done in public. It was a shame to them. Now, things have changed since then, where the person that says, I don't want to, he takes the shoe off himself. Ruth doesn't come and spit in his face. They don't do that. I remember sitting with a group of Jewish men at the synagogue in Bangor. We were there for a bar mitzvah for one of our friends. And they were talking about, and they didn't know I was a pastor, they didn't know who I was, we were just being polite with each other, and they were talking. And they said, the Bible talks about stoning people to death and an eye for an eye and all this stuff. And he says, a lot of the rabbis today, they say, it didn't really happen. Nobody ever really did that. They said, I don't know that maybe we weren't a little bit more rough around the edges back then. Maybe we did do that stuff because God commanded it. I jumped in on that and had a pleasant conversation with them. But that's what it had devolved to. They took the shoe off. In verse 9, Boaz said unto the elders and unto all the people, you're witnesses this day, that I bought all that was Elimelech's, and all that was Chilion's, and Mahlon's, that's the two sons, of the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren, and from the gate of his place. You're witnesses this day. You folks see it. We asked him, we did the right, and that was the lesson with the kids, doing the right thing the right way. Boaz didn't seek to subvert the law and just sneak off and marry her. Boaz did the right thing the right way. And he says, you've seen it, you're witnesses. And so Boaz seals the deal. Boaz will make sure that Elimelech's family line will be preserved and that the property will be retained. He also announces his intention to marry Ruth. I expect Boaz was quite happy to make this proclamation. And I also believe Ruth left behind her people to follow God. God made sure Ruth was taken care of in a way that left her with joy and a feeling of fulfillment. Now, Boaz was happy to let the whole city of Bethlehem know that he was taking Ruth as his wife, to love and to comfort and to protect. And I can imagine that the wedding was a time of great celebration. From Boaz's testimony, I think the people of this city were quite happy to see him happy. Again, I don't know the situation. I know Ruth was a widower, and Boaz might have been a widower. And some of you folks know what that's like, to find someone. And for the whole city to be, he's well known, he's respected, he's liked. And don't forget, when they had wedding celebrations in those days, they would go on for days, weeks, sometimes even a month or more. They would celebrate. It was a big deal. And here the Jewish people are celebrating the marriage of Boaz, one of their own, to Ruth, who was a Moabitess, yet had earned their respect. In fact, the Bible tells us that she was a woman of virtue, a virtuous woman. The word valiant, which is used to describe Boaz, and the word virtuous that's used to describe Ruth are very similar. Valiant is the idea of like a knight, has property, has the ability and responsibility and the determination to defend it. Virtuous for a woman is the idea of being committed to God, being godly, Proverbs 31 wife. And so this is a match made in heaven, quite literally. Verse 11, and all the people that were in the gate and the elders said, we're witnesses. We see, yeah, we'll testify. You did the right thing. And then they said, the Lord make the woman that has come into thine house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel. And do thou worthily in Ephraim, and be famous in Bethlehem. And let thy house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bare unto Judah, the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. And so, like Rachel and Leah, there's a blessing. They weren't obligated to do that. Yes, we're witnesses. We saw it happen. And let me just say, I hope you folks are like Rachel and like Leah, the mothers of the 12 tribes, the foundation of Israel. Ruth and Boaz will provide a great foundation for the future. That's their prayer. I just pray that God blesses you and you have all the kids you want and God just continues to bless your household. They want them to hang around so they can see God bless this union. When it talks about the house of Perez, in Genesis 38:27 says, it came to pass in the time of travail that behold, twins were in the womb. And it came to pass when she travailed, one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this came out first. And it came to pass as he drew back his hand that, behold, his brother came out. And she said, How hast thou broken forth? This breach is upon, or be upon thee. Therefore his name was called Pharez. Afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So Pharez was not the first to make an appearance. There was another kinsman redeemer that should have spoken, spoken up. He didn't. And so Boaz, the one that came after, got the greater blessing. Indeed, it seems that Pharez was the ancestor of the Bethlehemites in 1 Chronicles 2:5, 18, and 50. Moreover, Pharez gave his name to the section of the tribe of Judah that descended from him. That's from Numbers 26. 1 Chronicles 3:5 says the sons of Pharez, Hezron and Hamul. And Caleb, the son of Hezron, begat children of Azubah, his wife, and Jerioth. The sons are these, Jeshur and Shobab and Arden. These were the sons of Caleb, the son of Hur, the firstborn of Ephraim. Shobal, the father of Kiriath-jearim. Salma, the father of Bethlehem. Hariph, the father of Beth-gader. So that ties it in. That idea of Pharez ties them into that area, that land. Numbers 26:20 says, the sons of Judah after their families were of Shelah, the family of Shelonites, of Pharez, the family of the Pharezites, of Zerah, the family of the Zerahites. And so that's they're saying, may he bless you like the founder of this city, basically is what he's saying. May he bless you like the person that founded this city, who will be known forever as the founder of this city. And so verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife, and when he went in unto her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bare a son. There's more going on in that verse than we might understand. It's not just that they lived happily ever after. Ruth had been previously married and had no children. But here we see that she immediately got pregnant with Boaz. Their first time together, she got pregnant. In the time we're talking about, conception was always from the Lord and was not to be taken for granted. The reason Boaz married Ruth is because she had no kids from her husband. Yet her first time with Boaz, who's much older than she is, she conceives. It's a miraculous thing. Verse 14, and the women said unto Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, which has not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel, and he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life. Who? Boaz. Boaz is going to make sure that Naomi is taken care of. Naomi, who called herself bitter, is now being blessed by others for how God has taken care of her. A restorer of thy life and a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, has borne him. And Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom and became a nurse unto it. So she who came back from Moab without a husband, without any sons, with nothing but her daughter-in-law, no grandkids, she comes back, and now she becomes the nurse to her grandbaby, who she knows is going to be well taken care of. Because Boaz has got money, he's got property, he can make sure that they're all taken care of. And so we have she who was bitter now gets to raise a grandson, thanks to the goodness and provision of God. And they say she's better than 7 sons. Ruth genuinely loved Naomi and gave up her hope of a future to care for her mother-in-law. And God gave Ruth something far better in return for her faithfulness. A restorer of life, raising her grandson, would help keep Naomi young. It would help keep her young. At the back, Abigail said, Lucas, she went to give him a hug. He said, who are you? Don't you remember me from last year? I was here last year. Oh, yeah. She said, so she went out, she came back in. Lucas was back there handing out bulletins. And he said, here, I know you. I remember you from last year. And she gave him a hug. And on Fridays, I feel like a young man again with these kids. It's a wonderful thing. Verse 17 where do I want to go? Verse 17, the women, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi, and they called the name Obed. Now, Obed had a son, and his son's name was Jesse. And Jesse had a son. You guys know who Jesse's son was? David the king. So we go back to Boaz and Ruth, and where is Boaz from? Bethlehem. And from Boaz and Ruth, we have Obed, and we have Jesse, and we have King David. And who else do we have from Bethlehem? Jesus, yeah, Jesus. But next week, Lord willing, I'm going to talk about why Bethlehem. the little town of Bethlehem. Well, this is part of the reason why. Not only was it called out by the prophets that it was going to happen, but Boaz was of Bethlehem. Naomi was of Bethlehem. Ruth was not. And yet Ruth was brought into the family in the great will of God to marry Boaz, that Boaz could bring up a son, and we could have that line. And so Obed, in verse 17, he is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Pharez. Pharez begat Hezron. Hezron begat Ram. Ram begat Amminadab. Amminadab begat Nahshon. Nahshon begat Salmon. Salmon begat Boaz. Boaz begat Obed. Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David. They didn't know when they said that may you have that lineage of Pharez, that blessing, but they did. That blessing that they gave came true. King David was Naomi's great-great-grandson. Even better, Jesus would be part of her lineage as well, she who wanted to be called bitter. Now, some things on the kinsman redeemer. The kinsman redeemer had to be a family member. Jesus added humanity to his eternal deity so he could be our kinsman and save us. That relationship was even more estranged than finding out someone is your great-granduncle 4 times removed or whatever, however that works. You get lost in family trees pretty quickly. But the idea is that Jesus became our kinsman at this time of year, as we celebrate it anyhow at this time of year. So he could be our kinsman and redeem us and save us. The kinsman redeemer had the duty of buying family members out of slavery. Jesus redeemed us from slavery to sin and death. The kinsman redeemer had the duty of buying back land that had been forfeit. Jesus will redeem the earth that mankind sold over to Satan. Boaz, as kinsman redeemer to Ruth, was not motivated by self-interest, but was motivated by love for Ruth. Jesus' motivation for redeeming us is his great love for us. Boaz, as a kinsman redeemer to Ruth, had to have a plan to redeem Ruth himself. And some might have thought the plan to be foolish. Jesus has a plan to redeem us. And some might think that plan foolish, saving men by dying for them on a cruel cross. Yet the plan works and is most glorious. Boaz, as kinsman redeemer to Ruth, took her as his bride. The people Jesus has redeemed are collectively called his bride. Boaz, as kinsman redeemer to Ruth, provided a glorious destiny for Ruth. Jesus, as our Redeemer, provides a glorious destiny for us. But it all comes back to the idea of Jesus as our kinsman redeemer. This is why he became a man. God might have sent an angel to save us, but the angel would not have been of our kinsman. Jesus, in his eternal glory, without the addition of humanity to his divine nature, might have saved us, but he would not have been our kinsman. A great prophet or priest would be our kinsman, but his own sin would have disqualified him as our Redeemer. Only Jesus, the eternal God who added humanity to his eternal deity, can be both the kinsman and the Redeemer for mankind. Again, truly, Boaz and Ruth were a match made in heaven. And as I've gone through this and studied for what we're doing on Sunday nights, and as I've studied for doing it with the kids, I can't help but think this is one of the most beautiful love stories I've ever heard. And it's not like the romance novels that they write today where it's all about the physical aspects and looking at each other. It doesn't, we're not given a description of how Ruth looked. We're not given a description of how Boaz looked. We're given a description of their character and who they were. We're given a description of their loyalty to God. We're given a description of their loyalty to their family. But this is quite a different romance story than what you would see on television or what you would read in a book or a magazine. Yet this is God's perfect plan for Boaz and for Ruth. And Naomi is part of the story as the one that's just sort of one of the characters that's not in the middle, but kind of on the side. But we see through the course of her life how God has been merciful and kind to her, even in the loss of her husband and her sons. Because if her sons hadn't passed, well, if her husband hadn't passed, she wouldn't have gone back home. And if her sons hadn't passed, Ruth wouldn't have been able to get remarried. And she ended up in a much better situation the second time around. I had a friend in Florida, he's passed away now, but he played professional sports, and after that got into a bunch of businesses. He made a lot of money. He was one of those guys that he would contact Las Vegas or Atlantic City, and they would send a jet and pick him up and fly him out to gamble, and he would spend a lot of money gambling. And they would put him up for free and feed him for free, and all he had to do was go there and come back. He made a lot of money. And part of that, he got married, I think, 3 or 4 times, 5 times within the course of just a few years, and finally found someone that he was married to that he stayed married to, found the right one eventually. I don't think he was a believer back then. I think he was anything but. I think he was living a crazy life in the world. But when he finally found the right one and the difference it made in his life, he was a rich person. He had properties and things, and found the right woman to share his life with. And so what a beautiful story we have here. So Father, help us to remember, as we think about this love story, the love story that we think about at this time of year. That is the love of God for man, that Jesus would come in human form as a baby. Lord, when we think of babies, we think of those that need our protection and need our love. But Jesus came to protect us and to love us. Not immediately. He came as a human baby. But He came to die for us and to purchase our salvation and to redeem us unto Himself. And so thank You for that. And thank You for the relationship we can see between Ruth and Boaz, the town of Bethlehem, and this season of the Nativity. Lord, I ask You to bless us, Lord. Help us to have opportunity to serve You and minister to others through this holiday season, make a difference. And Lord, we just ask Your blessing in everything we do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hello, this is Jeff Tenney, pastor of Faith Bible Church of Oleman. Thanks so much for worshiping with us today. We trust it was a blessing and that you might find encouragement for the coming week in our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. If you're ever in the Greenbush area, we'd love to meet you in person. Our services start on Sunday mornings at 9:45 for Sunday school, 11 a.m. for the morning worship service, 6 p.m. for the evening service, and on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. we gather for Bible study and prayer. May God richly bless you and your family as you seek to serve Him wherever you are this week.